Hello everyone, my name is Claus Kropp and I'm the manager of the Lauersheim Laboratory for Experimental Archaeology. I'm sorry for the rather, well, improvised looking presentation, but nevertheless the content counts, and I hope to take you onto a journey into the topic of draft cattle in the upcoming lecture. My journey with draft cattle started in the year 2011 at an annual meeting of the German Ox Drivers Association. I was overwhelmed back then with how much passion and persistence some people still use cattle for draft purposes. Although most of the people present there did so on a private basis, I also met quite a few people which are using cattle in the context of open-air museums. A very well example for that back then was, and still is, the so-called state domain of Dahlem, Berlin, where Astrid Masson and her team are using draft cattle for various purposes, be it in front of a wagon or for the Berlin city folks, or for various agricultural tasks on site. As I started my job at the Open Air Laboratory in Lauersheim, I had the opportunity to start working with a trained team of oxen on site. Before that, I took many training classes and courses in order to gain some practical experience before we actually got the cattle for Lauersheim. It took me and my colleagues nevertheless a couple more years until we could consider ourselves at least a bit as skilled ox drivers. Looking at 2020, we are now training the cattle ourselves and skate up quite a bit, so we currently use 5 males, which means 3 oxen and 2 bulls, and 2 cows for our various draft purposes. My PhD thesis on the use of draft cattle in early medieval agriculture, the fact that I am an active ox driver myself, and my ongoing engagement within the ox driver communities and networks like AIMA, ALFAM or EXARC brought me to a point on which I wanted to evaluate the current situation of draft cattle usage within open-air museums and also archaeological open-air museums, and to develop an international framework for the exchange of experience in that field, and most importantly to promote the usage of draft cattle just because it rocks. Please see this paper therefore as conversation starter and starting point of a larger project that I am pursuing. I hope that the discussion after this talk will give us the opportunity to start with it today. So let's first ask a set of questions. Why do we even keep draft cattle in archaeological open-air museums? Well, most importantly, the presentation of draft cattle can, beside the agricultural implements themselves like plows or harrows, pose as one of the most direct links into our agricultural past. The use and even most of the techniques remained unchanged throughout the millennia. Therefore, draft cattle usage can open us windows into various periods starting from the Neolithic until the presentation of farm life in the first half of the 20th century. The use of draft cattle within museum contexts is also a good idea, as if it may function as a valuable and powerful way for the transmission of intangible heritage. To some extent, it is the museum, living history farms, or organizations like Tillers International that got into the role of preserving and teaching these fundamental techniques. Have a look at Howell's Living History Farm, for example, in the United States, on which they provide training sessions for US Peace Corps volunteers, missionaries, and others working in both international and local agricultural extensions. This is also reflected in many draft cattle courses that are held in museums, being at the Ecomusée d'Alsace in Ungersheim or elsewhere. Using the cattle for agricultural purposes can in this context also be seen as sort of a in vivo conservation of alt culture techniques. Only by using these agricultural implements, be it originals or reconstructions, in an authentical manner, we will be able to preserve these techniques or even to further develop them. Also, more generally speaking, working and training the draft cattle are of great importance. Let me quote Edward Schultz here from Colonial Williamsburg, which was writing the following in an article he wrote for a conference on living animals in museum activities in Zveřejňane in 2013. The skills of working draft animals have been declining throughout the developed world for many years. What took thousands of years to refine is very close to being lost. There are also advantages keeping cattle, as they are usually easy becoming the stars of each museum. Looking at Lausanne, where our draft oxen are by now available as stuffed miniature versions, or at Archaeological, where Isaac and James, two Zaragoza to Dunker cross oxen, even have their own Facebook page and fans of their own, you can clearly see the advantages of using these impressive animals as an integral part of the daily presentation in the museums. Starting from getting them haltered, yoking them, and getting them into harness, and then putting them to work can draw hours of visitors' attention. Lastly, there are clearly some functional and ecological benefits of keeping the draft animals in a museum context, and also in general. The smaller the fields get, or when thinking about medieval ridge and furrows, modern equipment is developing disadvantages compared to draft cattle. On a side note, we would not even be able to use a tractor on our ridge and furrows on site, even if we wanted to. Let me now come to a second question. What are the problems or limitations when keeping and using draft cattle in museums? In that respect, the historical setting, perspectively period in which cattle are to be implemented, can cause problems, of course. We are basically just not allowed to replicate animal keeping traditions or practices which are not conform to veterinary rules or laws. To some extent, this can also be said when it comes to harnessing. Not all known types of yokes can be considered as very animal-friendly. As a museum worker, you therefore always have to consider if it is necessary to break with the authentic setting for an animal welfare reason. We do this as well in the open-air laboratory, as we use modern 3-pad collars for all the heavy work of the draft cattle. In one way, this is another possibility to get in touch with the public again and get a positive conversation started. There is one more important thing that I want to talk about in that respect, and that is skills. And I am not talking about skills of the animals here, but skills of the handler. You can't just get a team of oxen and start working with them. There is so much stuff you can do wrong, be it causing pathological problems for the animals due to overloading or getting into dangerous situations. I can only advise everybody who is thinking about getting some draft cattle for their museums or archaeological open-air museums to have skilled staff available, or to get them properly educated. What we do here in Lausanne, for example, is that all the interns of our voluntary ecological year are going through various training sessions on site, including a seminar on low-stress stockmanship organized by a cooperation partner of ours. Let's come to perspectives for the future. Let me in this last part of my talk come back to what I said in my introduction. I am in the process of evaluating who and where in museum contexts cattle are worked or trained. I want to find out for what purposes they are kept, be it just showing or actually working with them. I also want to gather information on how they cope with challenges that they experience and how to solve them. In future, this could be a foundation of a deeper networking platform in which we could combine forces in order to promote the topic on a larger scale. I hope that you enjoyed this little talk and that we can start a lively discussion now.